And I invite Brother Gabriel to come forward and present the message for us tonight.
Yes, good evening to everyone. And as it was presented, there is one more study tonight. But let's us take this study as a review, because you've been studying the book of Daniel throughout the week. So we are going to focus on just a few elements from chapter 1 of Daniel. But before we go there, when you read this title, Watch and Be Sober, what do you think about? And we are going to define each word there. And watch, probably you saw some deer coming by. Sometimes they come in the morning, sometimes they come in the evening. And have you noticed how they are eating, how they are grazing around? There is always one that you may think that he is just wasting time. As you see in the picture, there is always one watching. Of course, they take turns. But there is always one watching. Why do you think there is always one watching while the others enjoy eating? Yes, they are afraid of predators. And even if no danger is there, they are watching to make sure there is nothing coming. So the word watch means to look at or observe with attention over a period of time, exercise care, and also be cautious about this. Now, my question tonight is, if the person that is watching is not sober, what could happen? And to give you a definition of what an unsober person means, probably you noticed, or maybe you heard some stories of drunk people driving. They crash into a pole, or into a post. And then when people ask them, why did you hit the post? What do they say? Well, I saw two posts, and I was trying to drive in the middle of them. So this is what it means to not be sober. So sober, it means to not be intoxicated, to be serious and calm. So tonight's study is watch and be sober. So in order to realize what you are watching and what you see, we need to be sober. And as I mentioned, we are going to focus a little bit on chapter 1 of Daniel. And as you may remember, the book of Daniel was written where? Where was the book of Daniel written? In Babylon. Okay, so why do you think I put there Babylon versus Jerusalem? Because Daniel and his friends, they were taken captives. Their home was in Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, they grew up, they were educated, and at this time, they are in Babylon. Now, what is the symbol for Babylon in the Bible? What does Babylon symbolizes in the Bible? Confusion. What else? It stands also for sin. If we go to Jerusalem, what does Jerusalem mean in the Bible? Jerusalem means the house of peace, or the house where God dwells with his people. But for Daniel, that was his home. Daniel grew up there. He was educated there. And when he was a teenager, he was taken to Babylon. Now, how would you feel, or what would be, I know some of you may be still living, or you are still living with your parents, but how would you feel when it's time to move out? What would you do first? I don't want an answer, but I want you to think about this. And I tell you, what did I do the first thing that I moved out? I realized that I go to the fridge, and the fridge is always empty. So when we move out, it's time to take decisions on our own. So that's Babylon versus Jerusalem. But to have even a better historical aspect, we see that Babylon is always a matter of worship. And when I mentioned that, I refer to chapter 3 of Daniel. Do you remember what happened in chapter 3? You studied this throughout this week. When people had to make a decision, to take a decision between true and false worship. And this matter of worship, it's not just coming from Babylon. If you go to the book of Revelation, chapter 12, you'll notice that this matter of worship happened from heaven. When it says in Revelation 12, if you read there, you'll see that the dragon and his angels made war against God, in other words. And this was a matter of worship. Then he was cast down to this earth, and this battle for worship continues. So in Jerusalem, people worship God, and here Babylon will do whatever takes to make you worship anything else but God. And I want you to realize something, because there are some people saying that, well, whenever the Sunday law is going to be given, then I will take stands with God's people. But until then, I can enjoy my life. Have you heard those people? So the ultimate goal of Babylon is to make people do what? Worship. But it's amazing that if you go to chapter 3 of Daniel, you'll notice that when the question for worship happened, how many stand firm? Do you remember the numbers? 4? Count again. So there were 3 names that we see that when the death decree, in other words, was given, there are 3 young men that they stand firm. And where are the others? Children taken from Judah? Where are the other friends that they had in Jerusalem? So as you notice tonight, it's that it's true. Babylon, the ultimate goal for Babylon is to make you worship. But before we go to chapter 3, there is chapter 1. And in chapter 1, Babylon is trying to integrate those young people. And we will study tonight how this integration takes place. It's by weakening the mind power. And when the mind is weakened, at that time, the question of worship comes. And many that were integrated, for them it's hard to make a decision anymore. It's hard to make a distinction between good and evil. And since we are talking a little bit about Babylon, in the book of Revelation, we find that name again. In Revelation chapter 18, verse 4, we see that the Lord calls his people out of her, that we may not be partakers for her sins. And just to think a little bit about people not being sober. I gave you the example of the drunk person. But can you think of any examples in the Bible that people were deceived, they were made unsober, and then they were taken advantage of, being taken advantage of? Do you remember John the Baptist? How was Herod when he took that decision about the death of John? He was drunk. So he was unsober, and while he was unsober, he took a decision. He was deceived, and he took a decision that he probably regretted for the rest of his life. And now if you think about another name, Samson, if you study his history, you'll notice that he was not drunk, and yet he was unsober. And when he was unsober, the Philistines, they took advantage of him, and he lost his power, he lost his eyes as well. So that's the strategy of Babylon. First, in Revelation 14:8, says that tries to make all nations drunk with the wine of her fornication. Then in chapter 13, when the people are drunk, they are easier to be manipulated. They are easier to be deceived. and is in chapter 13, verse 14, says that they are deceived by miracles. And in chapter 13, 8, all those people that have been drunken, all those people that they have been deceived, at the end they will end up worshiping the beast. So what does Babylon use to integrate us? And for this, we are going to read just a few verses from the book of Daniel, chapter 1, and we will start with verse 3 all the way to verse 7. If you have your Bibles, I invite you to open them to chapter 1 of Daniel, and we read from verse 3. And the king spake to Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and the king, and of the king's seed, and of the princess, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, and skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat, and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now among these were of the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And verse 7 says that, and unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names, for he gave unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar, and to Hananiah of Shadrach, and to Mishael of Meshach, and to Azariah of Abednego. You remember this story well. Now, if you think about some interesting facts here, those people that were selected, they were not ordinary people. They were of the king's seed. They were royals. They were leaders, were children of leaders in Israel, in Judah. Because they were thinking if they could gain the leaders on their side, then the whole people will follow. Another interesting fact here, they were young. And what does it mean when a person is young? It's teachable. Easier to teach, easier to train the way you want. So from those verses that we read, have you discovered what does Babylon use to integrate us today also? One of them is education. And it's true we need education. And for this, I'm thinking about the medical doctors and all the other professions that we couldn't have them if they would not go through education. But if you think about the education that this world provides, is it a mean to bring us closer to God? Think about this. Then the next aspect is that the king appointed them to have food and drink. And after I got married, even before I used to like watermelons. And after I got married, my wife noticed that I like watermelons. And anytime we go to the grocery store to buy something, and I see watermelons, I try to buy some, And a few times she stopped me. She said, well, we have to look for some watermelons that have seed in it. And that made me think a little bit. Because it's true. If it's seedless, it tastes maybe better. It's easier to chew. But think about what kind of chemicals they used to make watermelons without seeds. So it's the food that God gave in Genesis chapter 1, 29, the same food that we can find in the stores today. And I'm not even talking about a non-vegetarian diet. Also, changing of names. And we are going to study that later. And it's true that today, no one changes our name. Like my name is Gabriel, and it will be Gabriel all my life. But usually, after people, they go through this education, and their mind is weakened because of food and drinks. After they finish some education, their names is not Gabriel anymore. It's Dr. Gabriel. And they get to the point that people listen to what the doctors say more than what God says. So let us take the first aspect, education. And I noticed something interesting in verse 4, because when you think about education, maybe you think about mathematics or whatever other learning they had there, but one of the thoughts that they had to learn was the tongue of the Chaldeans. So how many of you speak a new language here, or a different language then? Yeah, so various of us, they speak different languages. Now, have you noticed when you speak a language that is not your mother tongue or language, have you noticed that you have a different personality? Have you noticed that sometimes, for me, when I speak Romanian, I'm a little bit more concerned what to say, because I can hurt easily with the words. But with English, maybe my vocabulary is not as rich, and I just talk. So it's a different personality. So there is a saying that says that learn a new language and get a new soul. But that affects also those that it's not just if you speak a new language. The other saying is, show me who your friends are, and I will tell you who you are. And I have here the example of Apostle Peter. And you remember when in the night when Jesus was sold and was taken into judgment, he was trying to mingle among those people, trying to talk like them, trying to curse them. And what did the people say? That even your speech gives you away. So what happens? When we mingle ourselves with different friends, our personality changes. We end up speaking like them, behaving like them, eating like them, doing everything like them. And language changes the cultural views, which changes the thought process, which in turn changes the behavioral pattern. And the next possible step in the long term is a change in personality. Now think about Daniel and his friends. They were young, they were teachable. If they were not educated right home, in a very short term, they would be like Babylonians. They would not be Israelites anymore. And this change, it's very little that you don't even observe it. And I'm thinking about one example. My brother came to visit us last year, and I was thinking, how is that even possible to see a difference in us already? Because we grew up in the same house, we ate the same food, we were educated by the same parents, and after a while I got married and I'm living here. He got married and he lives in a different country and he had to learn a different language. And last year, after we saw each other, maybe before that was about 5 or 6 years, at this time, I noticed that we dress differently already. We think differently. And you don't notice those changes. But this is also a way how Babylon is trying to integrate us. And when the time for worship comes, the question of worship comes, we wouldn't even question that. Now, how was Daniel able to stand despite the Babylonian education? What was his secret? I told you a little bit of his background. In Proverbs chapter 22, and here is for those, the parents in the room, says that train up a child in the way he should go. And when he is old, he will not depart from it. So it's true that Daniel had to go to college in Babylon. But because he had the right education at home, that college in Babylon did not affect him. He had a godly mother who knew the prophecy concerning the destruction of their city. She repeated to her son the words of God, that someday Hebrew children must stand in the hidden court of Babylon. Carefully did this mother teach her son to read the parchment scrolls of the prophets. And this education was not gained in the schools of the time, for they had departed from the plan of God. But holy mothers, living close to the everlasting Father, led their children by precept and example, by word and song, to form characters that would stand the test. So how was Daniel able to stand the education of Babylon, not to allow himself to be integrated, to speak like the wise people today? It's because he had the right character formed when he came to Babylon. And that's why, as you continue reading the story, we read up to verse 7, but if you keep reading, in verse 8 says that Daniel purposed in his heart not to defile himself. So how long do you think he needed to take that decision? Minutes? Months? We see that Daniel did not long hesitate. He decided to stand firm in his integrity, let the result be what it might be. So right away, he was able to say, or to discern between what is right and what is not right. And then the second aspect is the food and the drink. And how many of you, after you eat, you feel sleepy? And do you have an explanation for that? It's because the mind is connected to the body. If the body feels sick or if the body feels weak, guess what? The brain feels the same. And it goes the other way as well. So the mind is affected by the way we eat. And many times mental confusion says that dullness are often the result of errors in diet. And more than that, I mentioned that the language changes the human nature or the personality, but also the food that we eat and the drinks that we drink changes our nature as well. Peace of mind is lost. There is dissension, strife and discord. Impatient words are spoken and unkind deeds are done. Dishonest practices are followed and anger is manifested. And all because why? Because the nerves of the brain are disturbed by the abuse heaped on the stomach. So the language, the education can change the human nature or the personality, but also what we eat and what we drink, that will affect who is going to be you tomorrow. So because of wrong habits of eating, the world is becoming more and more immoral. God cannot enlighten the mind of a man who makes a cesspool of his stomach. But Daniel purposed in his heart right away because he was able to still make an intelligent decision. And when the king's wine was presented, what did he say? Remember that? He said, well, bring me another cup. He said, no, but bring me what instead? Water. When the king's meat was presented to him, which in the kingdom, it was the best food that you can find in the palace. What did Daniel say? No, but bring us pulse. And this pulse, if you read in different translations of the Bible, that word for pulse, it's vegetables. And here includes the peas, beans, whatever vegetables you see in that leguminous kind. Now, one other thought here, why do you think he made such a request? Because maybe some of you are still questioning why we eat only vegetarian food here. It says that they did not move capriciously, but intelligently. And remember that in order to watch and to be able to understand what you are watching at, you need to be sober. So they were sober when they took this decision. They decided that as flesh meat had not composed their diet in the past, it should not come into their diet in future. Meaning that they had a vegetarian diet before, they had a clear mind before, and at this time, when it was presented to them, they knew the danger of it. and they said not. It says that they decided it should not come into their diet in the future either. And as wine had been prohibited to all who should engage in the service of God, they determined that they would not partake of it. Now, how many of you presented the study today? Some of you did. So what was the purpose of you presenting the study? Just to show that you understand it? Or are we preparing to present that study even to those that ask questions? And that means that places us in the service of God. So if Daniel thought that in the service of God he should not use those kind of things that makes his mind wild, we ourselves, we are the same in the service of God. And just one interesting aspect here, we know that in Eden, the food was vegetarian. In Genesis 1:29, we see the food that God gave to people. In the new earth, again, the food will be the same as it was in the beginning. Now, something happened around the flood time, and from the Eden time to the flood, everyone had the same diet. And do you remember? Someone mentioned today what was the lifespan of Adam. Do you remember how many years did Adam live? Yes, over 900, right? Yes, 930. But what is the longest one that lived? 969. So the lifespan between Eden to the flood, we can say it was about 900 years. And that they had it because they had also a vegetarian diet. Now, from the time of flood, flesh food was introduced, and it's amazing to see the chart how the lifespan decreased dramatically. So first it was 900, but as soon as flesh food was introduced, that 900 was just history. And we come to around the 1800s, when the lifespan for the woman was about 35 years of age, and the man was 45 years of age. And you can research that to see for yourself. And then in 1800s, something amazing happened, because there is something that we call the health reform was given. And when the health reform message was given, the whole earth benefited from it. And even today, if you go to different grocery stores, you'll find many products called Morning Stars. And that's coming from the Advent history. And from 1800s, what is the lifespan today? Someone mentioned it today in my class. It was about 70, 75, 77. So do you notice the difference? Before, when the diet was right, as God said, people were living hundreds of years. As soon as it was given, flesh was introduced, the lifespan decreased. But if the lifespan decreased, what about our mental strength? It decreased as well. And we got to 1800s when the lifespan is 35 to 45. And then when the health reform was given again, lifespan increased. But what I want to point out is this, that we are preparing for heaven. And even if we have to stand the test of time, we need to have clear mind. And how can we get the clear mind today? Abstaining from everything that makes us unsober, right? So as we look at this paragraph here, it says that Satan brings to bear upon the last generation, which are weaker physically than any previous generation. So our situation, we are weaker than any other generation that lived before us. But it's not that all. When we think about his wisdom, it increased, and he's using all the wisdom he gained in 6,000 years to use to defeat us. So how much more do we need to have a clear mind today, or a sober mind, when we watch every day for temptations that come into our way? And the last point of our studies this evening is that the names were changed. And in the Bible time, names had special meaning because the parents, they would try to keep their thoughts close to God. For example, the name Daniel means God is my judge. So what do you think Daniel would hear any time when people call him Daniel? What would he hear? It will be a reminder that God is his judge, right? So at this time, until now, it was impossible for him, in a way, to forget who God is, because every time anyone would say Daniel, he would remember who God is. But his name was changed into, here the meaning says that keeper of the hid treasures of bed. So he would receive pagan gods' names. And the other people that were his friends says that Hananiah meant gift of the Lord. And again, that was changed. And we'll see the other person, Mishael, he that is a strong God, help of the Lord. And if you think about the other friends, the other children, I would say, that grew up with them in Jerusalem, and they were here in Babylon today, when the question about worship came, only the friends of Daniel stood. The other ones, they worshipped. And it was because they allowed themselves to be integrated. And as a reward of faithfulness, at the end of these years, they were found 10 times better than the others because they had a clear mind. Now, as a conclusion of everything that we looked over, what is the ultimate goal of Babylon? Do you remember that? To make us worship, right? And how does Babylon try to make us worship? Today, in time of peace, it's using this time to make us, or to integrate us into that system. And how does this integration take place? By weakening the mind. Through food, and you can think only about the vegetarian food. There is a term that we use sometimes, junk food, that we say it's vegetarian, but sometimes it fills the stomach, but sometimes we are sick for days after we eat that thing. So imagine your mental power, how it is. So the first point in the Babylon structure is to educate, to take your thoughts away from God, to weaken your mind, and then to take you away from God. And when the question is about worship, you wouldn't know what is good and what is not good anywhere. And I remember sometimes people will tell this to me, like, it doesn't matter to which church you go, because we worship the same God, don't we? And this happens only because we get to the point when we cannot make a distinction between good and evil anymore. So some points to take home with us from this presentation: we all want to be the ones standing when the test of worship will come. And I'm sure that every one of you wants to be a Daniel and the other friends. So in order to do that, if we still live with our parents, remember that Daniel was able to stand because of the education that his faithful mother gave him. If we are still with them, let us take advantage to listen to those thoughts. But also, even when we go out, we should make friends of, the same as we sang in the song, of God's children. Because our friends can bring us closer to God, or it can separate us from God. And after we spend time with them, our language changes, either bringing us closer to God or somewhere else. Then, whatever decisions we take, let us always pray before that. 1 Thessalonians 5:17 mentions that we should pray without ceasing. Because the enemy of God always comes with temptations every day. Like if you remember, when Jesus was hungry, he came to him presenting the whole riches of the world, and they would be given to him under one condition. What was the condition about it? A condition of worship. So if he comes with this kind of promises, do not believe him, because he cannot fulfill those promises. And Jesus mentions that he was a liar from the beginning. There is nothing that he can give. So pray without ceasing to be able to be sober and watch. And also, someone in my class today mentioned this Bible verse, that we should heed the word of God in our hearts, that we may not sin against him when we need to take decisions. So may the Lord help us that we may watch and be sober. Amen.